Beloved, welcome back to the shop. Well, Christmas was good to me this year. I have a few things to share with you, but on the very top of the pile was a gift given to me by my good friend, the Battle Chemist. What we have here has the potential to be one of the holy grails of crosscut saws. Now, the Battle Chemist didn't exactly know what he was buying. He sent some photos as he was going through the old logging towns of the Pacific Northwest on his YouTube pilgrimage and came across these, sent it to my manservant Jariah, and he said, yeah, you should probably get these, and this is one of them. This in my hands here has the potential to be, could it be, a Simmons Royal Chinook, a 513? Probably the most sought after saw, and to find one in a 5-foot length is something that I don't even have. Now the 5-foot length is really nice in a bucking saw because it can be handled by one person, which is pretty nice, pretty useful, and it can work in really tight or confined spaces. Let's do a little forensic investigation. There's a couple things, telltale signs that will tell us. Now, obviously, if we can resurrect the maker's mark from the waist, which should be there, that would tell us for sure, but there are other ways to find out without going to all that labor. So let's start with the handle, and then I'll show you what makes these saws, in my opinion, a national treasure. This handle is the reason why I'm starting to get my hopes up. This right here is an original Atkins 24, right here. Atkins. Now, Simmons and Atkins were the two #1 companies. The Simmons Royal Chinook was the gold standard for the Pacific Northwest logger, but the Atkins, like the 400 Lightning series, was just as good, on par. So the fact that this has an Atkins handle on it doesn't necessarily mean it's not a Simmons. They were interchangeable, and how the handles work, and this is all original right here. You can even see, now if you look at mine, you'll see the Atkins number 24 right there. This is all original. Beautiful. This one here also has that. But in addition to that, it has a really cool yellow, it had a yellow paint scheme right there. And I've seen Atkins that color. I think they're blue and yellow. Gold sometimes. You'll look right there. You can see the Atkins number 2, the 4 is obstructed, but you can just barely see it. But how these work is, and also, so right here, the 2 holes here, when you have 2 holes in a crosscut saw, this tells you right away that this is a bucking saw. Bucking saws are different. They're thicker, a little bit thicker material, more rigid, and they're straight on the back, on the spine. And what I mean is if you have a family saw, or if you have one in a family member's garage, check this. And you can tell right away if you look down it. If you look down the back of that spine, it should be straight. Now, if it has a curve in it, that's going to be a felling saw. Now, that's going to be a more rare saw. That'll be a saw that was intended for taking timber down. Now, the felling saws will typically only have 1 hole in the ends, and the bucking saws will have the 2 holes. The bucking saw actually is a more useful tool to proho, I think. The 2 holes in there give you the ability to change the trim or the pressure that you're putting on the saw. Just changes your angle a little bit. Most of the saws that I've seen run in the top hole. Now, this little pin right here is retained. There's 2 different size holes here, so you won't lose it, which is pretty clever. I've had to make these before, and I saw how it was done. So any handle can be used on any saw. So you pull that pin out, it's captured there, and then you put it in the hole. Or you line this up. Now this is the hand guard right here. This is made out of kind of a cast metal, and they're brittle, And the first time I cut down a big tree, I broke mine. So these were often, you'll find them, they were broken. So to find one still intact is rare. I have seen guys in pictures where they'll flip them up to the top and get them out of the way. I don't know if they use them or not. And the reason for the hand guard is, can you imagine, look how close your hand is, the sawyer's hand is to these teeth right here. And you get cut up on those. What I see on a lot of saws, and what makes this one so rare, is that these two teeth, they would take a pair of pliers or a wrench and break that off, break those teeth off, because you're not really cutting that deep anyway. You're going to hit your hands. And so that they would protect their hands that way. But this is a fully functional and completely intact handle. There are 4 detents, so if you need to use the saw vertically or 90 degrees, you can do that. In a lockdown, you can do it this way or this way. So there are 4 different positions for what makes these vintage, so this is a good sign right here. What makes these vintage saws so special, and why I call them a national treasure, is there is no longer the machinery to produce them. Fun fact, the Forest Service still keeps an inventory of these. I've been to the school that they still maintain the traditions and how to sharpen and file them. And they still have an inventory of the old saws. Now, the reason why they're better primarily is the way that they were ground. They were ground in a way that's called a crescent ground. How I'd best describe it is, how it was done was this steel would be slid out onto a giant table. An electromagnet would suck it down so it couldn't move, and then a giant grinding machine that ran on a cam, a crescent, would come by and grind what they call the crescent grind in here. And what that means is that the thickness of the saw here at the waist, right here at the teeth and the rakers, is thicker than the back, and that thinness tapers to the back, not only to the back, but to the outsides. So if you were to look at this, these thicknesses, like topographical lines on a map, go from thinner to thicker to thicker to thicker, and it's consistent out through the whole saw. Now, why is that a benefit? Why is that important? You have to remember that these were used by men off of their own energy. There was no power equipment. This was all done by hand. And for a saw to work, to cut through a tree, it has to have what they call a set in the teeth. Now, if you look at these teeth, you'll notice, the trained eye will see that every other teeth, one is bent out this way, one is bent out this way, and they alternate. That's called the set. That's important because without that set, this saw, as it goes down in through the wood, through the kerf, will bind up. Now, the more set you have, the bigger, more wood you have to cut. The wider that is, the bigger the kerf is that you have to cut. So if you can develop and build a saw that is very, very thin on the back and a little bit thicker here, that means that you only have to have a tiny bit of set, just a little bit. And when you have a little bit of set, then you're cutting like a laser beam through the wood. So it's a much more efficient, and you're not wasting power, energy from the men that are on the end of this misery whip. So the thinner, the more, that crescent grind was a technology for giving you the ability to cut very, very efficiently a very, very tiny curve. So we're going to check that right now with our trusty Mitutoyas. We'll zero our calipers. The thickest portion of the saw should be right up here, right in the middle. And we're at 2.7. This is going to tell us the quality of the saw, or how much grind or how much crescent is in it. And on the back, 1.6. That's telling us that this saw has a tremendous amount of taper from here down to here, getting thinner on the back. Now, that crescent shape, the thickness of the metal should look something like this. These two last measurements will paint the picture for us. They'll tell us exactly what we have. We'll start on the back here. .171. And the final measurement, 243. Those 6 measurements have given us the ability to map out the crescent grind of the saw, and I had the caliper set to the metric system. So 2.7 millimeters grinding, tapering down to 1.6, 2.7, 2.43, and down to 2.37. So that's getting thinner and thinner and thinner this way. And then here, we've got a 1.6. This has been on the back. So this would be the thinnest portion. The very thinnest portion of the saw, 1.6 millimeters right there at the waist, right where you want it. And then tapering, getting wider and wider, ultimately 1.71 and 1.76 on the outside. So a very, very thin spine on this, which is going to mean that I'll be able to file this with a very, very light set, which means that this is a very, very nice saw, as good as I have ever seen. Now, is it a Simmons Royal Chinook? Well, you'll have to subscribe and hit that bell button and find out next time. Next time, we'll take the stone to it and see if we can't resurrect the maker's mark and bring that out of the steel and see for sure exactly what it is. But what we know now is we have a premium 5-foot bucking saw, which is, if I could only have one, this would probably be the saw right here. Handy to be used with one guy. You can pack it. A tremendous, tremendous saw. And with that type of grind in it and the condition and not having the teeth broken off and the original Atkins or authentic Atkins handles, my goodness, this might just be the one. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and your families. Please keep us in your prayers, and we'll see you on the next video.